She had spent so many years trying to be enough, trying to do everything right, fix everything wrong, carry every weight without letting anyone see her tremble. She didn't know when it started. This quiet belief that she needed to earn her place in the world, that love was conditional, that grace had a price. All she knew was that somewhere along the way, breathing became harder. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. As if every inhale came with guilt, and every exhale came with fear. She lived like that for a long time, holding her breath in relationships, holding her breath in prayer, holding her breath through disappointment after disappointment, terrified that if she ever let go, everything would fall apart. She didn't realize she already was falling apart, quietly, invisibly, in the ways no one notices until the inside feels too heavy to carry. There were days she would sit alone, hands clenched, heart tight, whispering apologies for things she didn't even do wrong. She apologized for not being enough, for being tired, for being human. She apologized to God for the same things, thinking he expected more from her than he ever actually did. But grace has a way of finding cracks. It seeps into the places you try to hide, into the parts of you you're convinced are unlovable. And for her, grace came quietly. Not in a miracle or a breakthrough, but in a moment so simple she almost missed it. She was sitting alone in her room, knees pulled to her chest, feeling the weight of another day she couldn't fix. Her mind kept replaying every failure, every mistake, every moment she wished she could erase. She didn't pray. She didn't speak. She just breathed, slowly, painfully, as if even that required permission. And then it happened. Not a voice, not a sign, just a softness. Something warm, gentle, deep like a quiet acceptance she hadn't felt in years. It wrapped around her heart, not demanding anything, not correcting her, not reminding her of what she should have done differently. Just staying, just being there, like a presence she didn't have to deserve. She exhaled, really exhaled. For the first time in a long time, the breath didn't hurt. It didn't feel heavy. It felt free. In that moment, she understood something she had never truly believed. Grace wasn't a reward. It wasn't something she had to chase or earn or perfect herself to receive. It was already hers, waiting for her, breathing with her. She cried, not the kind of crying that breaks you open, but the kind that finally lets you rest. Because she knew, maybe for the first time, that God wasn't asking her to hold everything together. He was asking her to let go, to stop bracing herself for disappointment, stop punishing herself for being human, stop living like love was a test she kept failing. Grace wasn't something she had to stretch to reach. It was something that reached for her, something that had always held her, even when she didn't feel worthy of being held. And that realization, that love could be this gentle, this present, this steady, changed everything. She wanted to remember this moment forever. The moment she stopped fighting for air and let grace become her breathing. So if you've been carrying guilt, if you've been holding your breath for too long, if you've been living like you need to earn rest or love or peace, this is for you. Because grace isn't far away. It's here, in this very breath. And once you feel it, once you finally let yourself receive it, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. She had learned, far too early in life, how to carry things alone. Not because she wanted to, but because somewhere along the way, she began to believe that her pain was a burden, that her feelings were too much, that her needs were inconvenient. So she tucked everything inside, her disappointments, her fears, her hopes that felt embarrassing to admit. She convinced herself that silence was strength, and that independence was the same thing as being okay. But silence isn't strength, and being alone with your pain doesn't make you brave. It just makes you tired. She carried so much that her heart felt heavy, like she was walking through life with invisible stones tied to her chest. Stones made of guilt, self-doubt, memories that still hurt, and expectations she could never meet. Some days the weight felt manageable. Other days it felt impossible. But she never told anyone. Not once. Part of her wanted to. There were moments she stood on the edge of confession. Moments she almost said, "I'm not okay." Moments she wished someone could just look at her and see through the smile she had carefully learned to wear. But every time the words reached her lips, she swallowed them. She convinced herself that other people had bigger problems, that she didn't have the right to interrupt anyone's life with her own. So she carried the weight alone. And with time, it didn't just settle on her shoulders. It settled in her breathing. Every inhale felt tight. Every exhale felt incomplete, as if her body was reminding her of everything she refused to release. She didn't realize how heavy she had become until one night, sitting in the quiet, her hands trembling with exhaustion, she whispered, "I can't do this anymore." Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly, for the first time in years. And something happened. The world didn't collapse. She didn't fall apart. She didn't drown. Instead, she softened. The weight didn't disappear, but it loosened. As if Grace had been waiting for the moment she finally admitted that she needed more than her own strength. She had spent so long believing that God expected perfection from her, that weakness made her unworthy, that surrender was the same thing as failure. But in that moment, in that small, fragile confession, she felt something shift. Not outside her, but inside. Something warm, something relieving, something like a hand touching the center of her heart and saying, "You were never meant to carry this alone." And that's when she realized the truth she had been missing. The weight wasn't proof of her failure. The weight was proof of her humanity and grace. Grace was the strength she had needed all along. For so long, she had been living on shallow breaths, the kind you take when you're afraid to feel too much, the kind that keep you functioning but never truly alive. She didn't even notice it happening. Stress had become normal. Tension had become familiar. And holding her breath had become her way of surviving every disappointment she didn't talk about and every expectation she couldn't meet. Her body learned the pattern before her mind did. Tight shoulders, tight jaw, tight heart. Every inhale short and guarded. Every exhale incomplete, as if she feared that letting go might make everything fall apart. It wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just the way she paused before answering a message, the heaviness she felt waking up, the quiet moments when she realized she'd been clenching her stomach for no reason at all. She lived like that for years, breathing just enough to get through the day, but never deeply enough to feel free. Until one afternoon, without planning it, she stopped. Stopped rushing. Stopped thinking. Stopped holding the world up with her bare hands. She sat down, closed her eyes, and took one slow breath, one real breath, for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't special. No music, no vision, no miracle moment. Just air filling her lungs, and something inside her loosening. It surprised her. Not because it felt dramatic, but because it felt safe. Like her body was saying, "This is what you've needed all along." She hadn't realized how much she'd been carrying until she felt the relief of that single deep breath. A breath without guilt. A breath without fear. A breath that didn't need to be earned, just received. And in that breath, she felt grace. Not the distant, unreachable kind she spent years trying to deserve, but the kind that settles into your bones and whispers, "You can rest now." Her shoulders dropped. Her heart softened. Her mind, so used to bracing for impact, felt quiet for the first time in days. Maybe weeks, maybe years. She hadn't known how desperately she needed that breath, because she had never learned to live without pressure. She had tied her worth to productivity, her peace to perfection, her value to how well she held everything together. But grace doesn't work like that. Grace shows up in the small, unguarded moments, in a breath you didn't force, in a peace you didn't negotiate, in a softness you didn't expect to find. She opened her eyes. The world looked the same, but she didn't, because now she knew. Sometimes healing begins with the smallest inhale, the quietest surrender, the moment you stop fighting your own humanity and let yourself breathe. Rest never came easily to her. Even on quiet days, even when the world slowed down, her mind kept moving, replaying old conversations, reliving old mistakes, rehearsing disasters that never came. Her heart was always bracing, always anticipating the next hurt, always preparing for something to go wrong, as if peace was fragile, as if joy could only be borrowed, as if rest was a luxury she hadn't earned. She didn't know how to be still without feeling guilty, how to take a break without hearing the whisper, "You should be doing more," how to breathe deeply without remembering all the ways she had fallen short. Her heart didn't know softness. It knew survival. But grace kept meeting her anyway, in gentle ways, in ordinary moments, in whispers she didn't recognize at first. Grace doesn't rush healing, it invites it. It doesn't demand trust, it grows it. Slowly, almost secretly, something in her began to change. She didn't feel the need to rush through her mornings anymore. She didn't carry the same tightness in her chest. There were afternoons where she caught herself smiling for no particular reason. Evenings where she sat on the edge of her bed, without checking her phone dozens of times to make sure she hadn't disappointed anyone. Little by little, her heart stopped fighting, stopped gripping so tightly onto fear, stopped expecting the worst. There was a softness now, a quiet trust that hadn't been there before. She realized that rest wasn't something she needed to earn. It was something she needed to allow, to receive, to practice. Rest began with small choices. Choosing to pause instead of push. Choosing to listen instead of perform. Choosing to breathe instead of brace. Choosing to forgive herself for all the years she didn't know how. One night, while sitting alone in her room, she placed a hand on her heart and felt it beating. Steady, warm, alive. And for the first time, she realized something beautiful. Her heart wasn't tired because it was weak. It was tired because it had carried her through seasons she thought she wouldn't survive. Rest wasn't failure. Rest was gratitude. A way of saying, "Thank you for keeping me alive." And in that moment, in that simple, quiet, holy moment, her heart finally let go. It didn't give up. It healed. It rested. It learned that it didn't need to rush to be worthy. It didn't need to prove anything to be loved. It finally understood that grace doesn't meet you where you're perfect. It meets you where you're tired. And once her heart learned to rest, joy didn't feel so far away anymore. There wasn't a dramatic moment. No revelation, no sudden breakthrough, no tear-streaked prayer that changed everything. It happened quietly, the way dawn replaces night without asking permission. She woke up one morning and realized she didn't feel as afraid anymore. The heaviness was still there, but it didn't define her. The guilt was still familiar, but it didn't own her. And for the first time in a long time, her heart felt open, soft, ready. She didn't plan it. She didn't force it. She just let go of the beliefs that had bruised her, of the expectations she could never fulfill, of the weight she was never meant to carry alone. It didn't happen because she tried harder. It happened because she finally stopped trying to control everything she couldn't heal by effort. In that quiet surrender, she felt grace move differently. Not just around her, but through her. It filled the spaces she once hid, the wounds she once ignored, the parts of her she used to apologize for. It felt like warmth, like steady breathing, like someone whispering, "You can stop punishing yourself now." She realized she had spent years treating herself like a problem to be fixed, a story that needed a better ending, a burden God tolerated more than he loved. But that was never the truth. Grace had always been reaching for her, not to correct her, but to comfort her, not to shame her, but to show her she was still his, still chosen, still wanted. That day, she sat on the floor of her room, legs crossed, eyes closed, hands resting loosely on her lap. She breathed in, breathed out. Nothing spectacular happened, but everything changed. Because this time, she didn't resist the softness. She didn't argue with her worth. She didn't measure herself by her scars. She simply let Grace in. And when she did, she felt something inside her unclench. Her shoulders dropped. Her breath deepened. Her heart felt lighter. Not empty, but free. Grace didn't erase her past. It didn't rewrite her story. It rewrote her. The way she saw herself. The way she carried her pain. The way she allowed love to touch her again. She opened her eyes and the world looked the same. Same walls, same room, same life. But she wasn't the same woman. Because now she understood that Grace wasn't something she visited. It was something that lived with her. In her. Like breath. And in that realization, she found peace. Not the kind that comes from answers, but the kind that comes from surrender, from softness, from letting herself be loved without earning it. That was the day she finally let Grace in. And nothing was the same after that. She never expected healing to feel like this. Not triumphant, not dramatic, not like a scene from a story where everything finally makes sense. It felt quieter than that. Quieter, and infinitely more real. It felt like waking up and realizing her shoulders weren't tight anymore. Like moving through her day without apologizing for existing, for resting, for feeling. It felt like taking a deep breath and not bracing for pain on the exhale. For the first time in years, breathing felt natural, unforced, gentle, free. And she realized this was Grace. Grace wasn't the answer she had begged for. It was the presence she hadn't known she needed. It didn't erase her past. It untangled her from it. It didn't promise she'd never fall again. It reminded her she'd never fall alone. And that truth held her in ways fear never could. She used to think she had to understand everything to trust again. Now she understood nothing. And yet, she trusted more deeply than ever. Because trust didn't come from clarity anymore. It came from rest. From knowing she didn't have to carry herself by sheer strength anymore. From knowing she could let go without falling apart. There were moments now when she would pause in the middle of something simple. Washing dishes, folding a blanket, watching the afternoon light fall across the room. And she would feel it. That softness. That warmth. That peace that had followed her all the way out of her pain. She'd place a hand on her chest, feel her heart beating steadily, and whisper, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Because that's what grace does. It stays. It stays when you push it away. It stays when you blame yourself. It stays through guilt, through doubt, through every version of you that doesn't know how to be gentle with yourself. It stays until you're finally able to see what was true all along, that you were never unworthy, just unconvinced. Breathing became freedom the moment she realized God wasn't asking her to be perfect. He was asking her to be present, to breathe, to trust, to let herself be loved without earning it. And now, when she inhales, she doesn't fear life. When she exhales, she doesn't fear herself. Because grace isn't just something she receives anymore. It's something she lives, something she carries, something she breathes. And as long as she breathes, she'll remember this. She is held, she is safe, she is free.